We are here today at one of the highest volume Whole Food Market stores in Southern California, the Venice, California location, to meet with Tom Wright, Whole Food Market's sustainability consultant, to explain to us their new zero waste initiative. Tom, tell us a little bit about this new zero waste initiative.
Well, zero waste is a phrase that a lot of people have heard, but it's a specific definition of zero waste that I want to talk about. There's an international organization called ZIWA, Zero Waste International Alliance. It's ziwa.org is their website. And they have a specific definition for zero waste, and Whole Foods is aligned with that definition. Fundamentally for the store, what it means is that the store has to divert at least 90% of its throughput not to landfill or incineration. Okay, so what's throughput mean? Well, you whatever comes into the store, whatever goes out of the store, that's not sales, okay, that's throughput. Okay, so most of it goes out the back end of the store. The majority of it, in the case of Whole Foods Market, is compostable material or donatable food. About 60% of the 90% is food. Another 30% is recyclables of various kinds. This definition is certified by an entity called the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council, which is actually based out of Orange County. And they've been certifying Whole Foods stores in Southern California now for about a year and a half. And I think we have 9 stores certified now, going on 19. There's another 10 in queue. And eventually the whole Southern California region, with one exception. There's one store that doesn't have the right kind of outlet for compost, and so it can't get certified yet. So, but all the stores would be certified for zero waste.
So today we're at the Venice location,
yes,
which is one of the highest volume stores in
yes,
Southern California. And we're discussing, obviously, the Zero Waste Initiative, but more importantly, you wanted to really focus in on some of the food waste policies and issues that go on here.
Yes. As part of the initiative, there's a reason, again, back to the fact that most of the throughput is perishable material. And that the store, being a produce-oriented store, a prepared foods deli-oriented store, if a shopper goes into Whole Foods Market, they should realize that one side of the store is produce, and then the other side of the store is prepared foods, deli. Okay, and that's how the stores are designed. Those two departments, of that 60% that I talked about, they represent about 90% of the 60%. Okay, so they have the most risk with perishables. There's other departments that also have perishables. There's specialty, there's bakery, there's meat, seafood, and dairy all have perishable too. And the best way for them to use their perishables is to talk internally. Those 6 departments really have to talk about short-dated blemishes, things like that. There's a way to think about it, so they use things internally first.
So for a store to get to the Zero Waste Initiative, which is 90% being diverted, these 6 departments need to learn how to communicate effectively to diminish anything that's being tossed.
The smartest thing for them, again, the simple rule of thumb is to use internally first. And so that's not even diversion, that's sales. So that's actually the smartest thing to do at first. And so that's why we want to teach this, that composting isn't the object. Compost is the last step. The object is actually to just be aware that there's perishables, you're in a business. The metaphor I like to use is right-sizing of perishable purchasing. And by right-sizing, I mean communications about within those teams, so that they understand what's perishable and when it can be used for something else before it goes to the next step is donation to humans, and the next step is donation to animals, then compost. So there's a simple hierarchy.
So each department works on a philosophy called right-sizing.
Correct.
And we're in the produce department. Are we going to explore right-sizing here at this store?
We're here a little too late to actually see the beginning of the process, because we're here as the store is open. Every morning, early in the morning, 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, before the store opens, the produce team literally goes out and culls out blemished or what's looking perishable fruit and vegetables, in other words, to make every day start fresh. the way they do this is they have two boxes of culling. One box is for things that can be used internally first. In other words, the culler, the produce team member, makes a decision about what can be used for chopped, what can be used for soups, whatever can be used for cull internally. Then there's also a box that they're culling into that's just going to go straight to compost already. They start right away. So right away, they're making a distinction between what has value and we should try to use internally, and then what goes straight to the compost model.
Okay, so that's the first step at the produce. What's the second step?
Well, then you have that box of internal usable produce, okay? Now that gets staged in the back of the house in a produce cooler, and it literally says that this is for use internally. Produce, since they're the cullers, actually in terms of hierarchy, they have the right to use the cull first. They can use the cull for chopped fruit, they can use the cull for juicing, they can use the cull for any number of other things they might want to use it for. Obviously, if a tomato has a slight blemish on one side of it, you cut off the blemish, but you can chop up the rest of it for salsa. You know, so that is that kind of thinking. And then the next step is that prepared foods comes in and has a right to the cull, to that same shelving. They go to the same shelving. And then prepared foods can make soups, stews, whatever they feel like. They can add, again, let's say they're doing a quinoa salad, they can add chopped veggies into the quinoa salad from the cull. They don't have to use fresh produce.
So what's dependable in that box that day is what's being made.
That's correct. It's creative. The language we call for prepared foods, we call it cull artistry.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, because it's the idea that this is their time to sort of invent what they can use it for. In the restaurant business, they call it the restaurant mentality. It's the use everything mentality.
To use everything mentality. So what's the next step after that? After the culling goes back into the cull box, first the produce department gets to use it, and then another department gets to use it.
Yeah.
Is it usually gone by then?
Well, by the way, there might be some other things, like there might be short-dated dairy that ends up in the same shelf. And again, all the perishable departments, bakery and everything, bakery can, croutons, for instance, can be made from somewhat stale bread. So all this comes together. Eventually, if the cull is not used internally, then the next step for the cull is to set it up for a food bank. And so there's again a separate shelving in the back of the house that says donation. And the food bank comes at a specific time and knows that it's their shelf. It's very important for team members to understand that because you're dealing with perishables, a food bank should have a cold chain. So they either should have a refrigerated truck or they should have coolers. Because a lot of this stuff, this is part of the Good Samaritan law, a lot of this stuff has to keep in a cold chain. If you have a short-dated yogurt cup, for instance, today's the 18th, let's say it's the 19th, and nobody in-house can use that yogurt cup, well, you cannot give it to a food bank as a dry object. You have to give it to the food bank in a cold chain.
So, just for clarity, although we're in the produce department, you are suggesting and saying that every department that you earlier mentioned does a culling process first thing in the morning.
Yes.
And they have two boxes.
Well, no, just the produce is the only one that has the two boxes.
Okay.
If you're in dairy or bakery, you do a process. Bakery probably, they wouldn't call it culling, they just call it day olds. Usually the night before the bakery gets rid of the day olds. So they could do it in the morning. But again, that has traditionally been the driver of food banks, by the way, coming to stores, is to get the bread.
Okay.
And so we're trying to inform the food banks there's more than bread at Whole Foods.
So I'm just trying to understand how the other departments really break it down. So you're saying that the bakery does day olds. Does that mean they go on sale the next day, or does that mean the day olds go to the food bank?
The prepared foods would have first dibs at the day olds.
Okay.
For stuffing, for croutons, whatever they could use a bread product for. And so again, internal use always first. And then to the food bank, then to the donation shelf.
And when they're culling either at the night and the morning, these other departments, it goes back to that designated shelf
in a cooler
that the internal personnel can go to use for their different departments.
Different departments, correct.
Okay, and the same goes for dairy?
Yeah, same goes for meat, seafood.
Seafood.
Probably this Venice has a sausage maker here. So Venice virtually has no meat scrap waste because like sausage pros that they are, they can use everything.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so I can see how you're really getting to zero waste here. What
Yeah.
a great example for all the other stores out there. So after each department does their culling, and then each department gets to shop the culling shelf, what's the next process?
Well, after use, then there will be a time when everybody realizes let's say it's noon, okay, that it's time to stage that for the food bank the next day pickup for the food bank. And so that goes to a separate donation shelf. And then the coal shelf per se becomes empty, okay, available. And again, a larger store may be feeding that coal shelf all day long. Okay, Venice is it's the highest volume store for Whole Foods in Southern California. So it's going to probably cull throughout the day, refresh.
And each department can be pulling throughout the day?
Throughout the day. Prepared foods is going to change over from breakfast to lunch to dinner.
Okay.
So they're going to be on their own little cycle there too. And so for each of those meal times, they have the right to go back and see what inventory is there. And it's
part of the creative process.
It's part of the creative process, and and from a margin point of view, it's free to them. So they reduce shrink, okay, they reduce the actual loss, okay, because it gets used internally, and they increase margin because they're using it, okay, to sell. So the process is really a business mentality process.
So you're reducing shrink,
yes,
you're increasing margin because you're selling something else, and you're preventing loss.
Preventing loss, yeah.
Okay, great. So then...
And the other thing I should point out is you're creating feedback amongst yourselves, a conversation amongst yourselves. Because it's when you see something redundantly over excess for 5 days in a row, you got to say something to each other like, I think we're ordering too much of this stuff.
Hey, who's ordering the bananas?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So then the food bank is staged every day to come to the store.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned there's a separate box though when you're in the produce, and that's going to compost.
Yeah, that's the culler makes that. It's an executive decision. That's part of the process. We know that some of the stuff just not, or either there's too much of something that can't be used internally, whatever the thought process of the culler, they make an executive decision, and that goes to a compost. In this stores, they build compost pallets for a backhaul to the distribution center. Some stores have compost bins, and then they have a route service that picks up.
Okay.
But that's what we mean by compost. That's what I mean. It doesn't get composted at the store. It's going to somebody that is going to compost it.
Since this product is going to composting, is that considered diverted? It's
Yes.
not considered part of it. So it's within the zero waste strategy.
Correct.
Okay, and I would assume with such efficiency that there's probably not too much going to compost.
Well, this is the idea of this training, is to try to, compost is a very good thing. We need soil enrichment, okay? So compost is a very smart thing, especially for organic agriculture, and that's part of Whole Foods brand identity, right? Is the largest certified organic grocer. At the same time, the goal of excess is not compost. That happens to be the last link, okay? But we want to cascade from internal use, smart buying, give it a right sizing of purchasing. We want that to be the first and second goal. And then we donate to humans, then we donate to animals, and then we compost.
Okay,
so it's this idea that the stuff itself isn't always destined to compost. That is a smart outlet for the last link.
It's the smartest choice for the last hurrah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned donating to animals. Tell us a little bit about how that process might work, and is that an individual store choice?
Very much so. Some things are multiple metro region choices, but animal donations, for one, part of Whole Foods has animal compassion guidelines, and so part of the process is that you should go to see the outlet and make sure the animals are being treated correctly.
So if a farmer came to your individual store and said, I want to set up a program where I can come pick up your produce or bakery that's not being used internally, you would suggest that the person making the decision would first visit the farm and make sure that the welfare is in line with your global initiative.
Yeah, it has to be transparent.
Okay.
We had a situation, I don't want to get too specific, but we had a situation where we had a hog farmer who would have been an outlet in a certain metro area, but the hog farmer wouldn't allow us to go visit his hog farm. So that stopped the decision right then.
And do you think that if a current store isn't on an animal donation program, they should look for one because that's a better value than the final hurrah, which is composting?
One of the things about donation is we try to put it in the lap of the marketing specialists at each store. So again, it is a store-based decision. The donation, the food banks are a store-based decision. Yes, there's guidelines that we want them to have coolers. Okay, that's just smart because you're dealing with perishables. But it's the store-level decision. And the marketing specialist at each store is the best person to decide, because there's a public relations give and take here with the food bank, with the animal outlets. And so in that process, yes, they go out, they see it, they make a relationship. We want to make sure that the animal people, just like the food bank, are consistent. They pick up within the window of time that the receiver has in the back of the house. The receiver's really critical with donations. The receiver has to know the personalities that are coming back into the house to take things away. So the marketing person, the receiver, work together to stage donations, and they have to be timely. You know, whatever that window it is. Generally speaking, it's early in the morning, between 9 and 10, for instance. It's a very common time for food banks or animal rescue places or zoos to come and pick up stuff. And it's because they've cleared away. It's a turn aspect, and they can clear it out of the back room. Whole Foods has very small back rooms, generally speaking, relative to other supermarkets that I've been associated with. And so it's very important for the donation entity to understand that they got to get there on time and get it out and come back. Whatever, if it's the next day, virtually food can be donated every day. That's a smart thing. And again, that's a turn. That's moving the space over and over again.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order to get to this zero waste initiative, which Whole Foods Markets has launched, and this store is doing incredibly well. It's a model store since it's such high volume, but it's also very, very efficient.
And it has a small back room, and it still does amazing things.
And still does amazing things, is to really work on this right sizing philosophy.
Yes, yeah.
Which is first to cull, and I would suggest communicate. Cull and communicate.
Yes.
And then second would be to separate for donation to people. Then the third would be donation to animals, and then the fifth and final would be a composting play.
Outlet, yeah.
Well, this is really fascinating information. I'm sure you're going to be educating a lot of other stores and team members out there on best practice and right sizing.
I hope so. I mean, that's the object of the Green Mission, the overarching brand behind this is to do the right thing for the earth, and you know, it's a whole planet, whole people. You know, is really that's the core of Whole Foods. So by doing this process, we're being good stewards, and we're being good business people too, because we are going to reduce shrink, and we are going to increase margin. So
Conscious Capitalism.
Yes,
I think I read that book.
Yes, I think we know who wrote it too.
I think so.
Yeah.
Tom, Whole Foods is really known to have such beautiful produce sections and abundant displays. How would a buyer actually really focus in on accurate buying? How is that possible?
It's very difficult. Of course, you have historic sales records, right? And so what you sold a year ago today, and what the chain is putting on promotion. And so you have all these variables that, as a buyer, you have to keep track of. And quite frankly, the reason right-size purchasing is the orientation is because being a perfect purchaser is just not real. You know, so you have to be able to adjust and adapt, and that's part of why we're suggesting this idea of right sizing.
To help avoid with having someone have a perfect complex when it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Yeah, it's just too many variables. I use mangoes often as an example because tropical fruit is a big deal in Southern California, especially, and mangoes today you have last year's sales against, you have the price point of last year's sales, you have the price point of this year's sales, you have competitors that maybe figured out mangoes were something they should promote, or competitors that forgot to promote mangoes. I mean, that's just it. It could go on and on. Or mango chicken just became Oprah, you know, just showed mango chicken on a TV show. You know, and all of a sudden everybody wants to make mango chicken. It's really tough, and so that's the point.
That's the point of right sizing.
That's the point of right sizing. Yeah.
That's great. So, Tom, is this an example of items that have been culled and then reused within the store?
Not necessarily everything in here is from cull, but obviously this is a good outlet for the cull. They call it the chop chop for obvious reasons.
I buy this all the time. Not only is it convenient, but little did I know I was helping to reduce food
Yeah, you
scraps.
are. You are, and chopped fruit and chopped vegetables have become very popular. People, for whatever reason, just don't want to mess with it at home anymore. And so it's a very good outlet for the coal, and it's a very good product, and everybody wins on this one. This is one of the things that makes Venice a unique store, is they have a smokehouse and sausage makers.
I think it's one of the most innovative ways to reduce food waste that I've heard of in a long time.
Yeah, it's a historic way to reduce. I mean, this is age-old. Smoking is to help preserve. Sausage is to help extend the life of an animal carcass.
And everybody loves it, so why not?
Yes.
Except your vegan department.
Yeah, I guess you could add vegan sausage, but it wouldn't have any
But
animal
you know what?
carcass
That's copacetic. They're getting along, so.
It's just like the suggestion with mangoes, the same thing can happen with a certain cut of meat. You know, it's really tough to, how many chops do you put out, right?
Right.
And then some days you sell them all, some days you don't. Then you have to be smart about the excess.
And they go to this brilliant.
They can go to sausage, right?
Sausage.
Or they can get smoked too. They can get extended to being smoked.
Why it's so important to pay attention to food as part of your zero waste strategy is because that's one of the largest contributors to landfills.
Yes. And the zero waste strategy has a lot to do with lowering our carbon footprint. It's really, I mean, when you talk lower our ecological footprint, it's waste not, want not. It's kind of an old rule of thumb.
Do you think that people and stores in general are really, I know Whole Foods has for a long time thought about their strategy when it comes to food scraps. Do you think it's really more of a heightened conversation now?
It seems to be. I mean, obviously I'm in the business, so I like to think that's true. You know, it's like, you've been knocking on a door for years, and finally the door opens. You know, so sure, I would say that's true. And I do think in California, and specifically, they just passed a piece of legislation, AB 1826, which is basically to get organic material, that's small organic, okay, we're meaning any living thing, any meat, plant, and stuff. To get
so that's going to be implemented here in California?
Yeah, in the next, it's a 5-year process, and that means that material is, people are going to become more sensitive to it. We hope, right? That's the whole idea. They're not going to just throw it away. Okay. Eventually, all restaurants, all supermarkets will have some sort of process to deal with food scraps that doesn't end up in a landfill. Hopefully, this makes them all think about the value of it. You know, and that throwing it away is not an option.
It's zero option.
Yeah.
This is another department that is involved in the coaling process.
Yes.
So, but I mean, it's obvious that these have expiration dates. So how does that work? Do they pull it the day of and donate it?
Generally speaking, okay, so the process with dairy at this store, I did ask, is with 2 days left, they pull it. So so today is the 18th, so anything that says the 20th on it was supposed to be pulled this morning. And so the earliest date here should be the 21st on any of these items.
So 2 days out, you pull it and you take it to your coaling
to the
cold station.
Yeah, to the again, for internal use first. Some yogurt is obviously can be used internally, especially plain or vanilla yogurt. It has a lot of outlets for it. But then if it can't be used internally, then it gets donated to a food bank.
And they pick it up the next day and they probably eat it that day, so it doesn't...
No, as long as the Good Samaritan rule is as long as you give it to them on the day of the use by or date code, that's legitimate. There's no liability to the store.
Right.
And is kept in a cold chain. That's, again, the other thing to emphasize. If it's in a cold chain, it needs to be kept in a cold chain.
That's great. So most food banks, I would assume, you know, from back in the history, we're really just getting dry products. It's wonderful for a food bank to get yogurt and fresh milk.
Oh, yes.
This is a beautiful cheese department.
Yeah, isn't it?
Oh my goodness.
The bakery department is sort of the historic day-old donation to the food bank. It's sort of when everybody says donate to the food bank, it's the first thing, oh yeah, you have bread. And that's the first thing they think of. And it's true, it's true. And again, back to the right sizing, it's very hard to say which bread's going to sell every day, all the time. And so you tend to, you have a shrink percentage that you tend to want to manage. Or you admit to yourself you're gonna
have X amount of shrink a day, but you try not to go over that.
Correct.
And sometimes you do,
Yeah,
and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
But you can't run out of things.
Correct.
So that's where it gets a little ambiguous.
It's really tough.
So in this department, the bakery department, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now when it comes to these pastries, these aren't cold, these go straight to donation?
That's what you would prefer that, yes. Now again, this type of product is very hard to tell. It takes a lot of sincere on the spot management, because how do you tell what's in the front is older than what's in the back, and vice versa? Somebody has to know that. Somebody has to know who placed it there. So it's much different.
It's a beautiful department.
Yes, it is.
They have truffles and vegan truffles.
Yes, we got vegan truffles, that's for sure.
So if it's really an internal process within this department to manage.
All puns intended, hands-on.
And if it doesn't get sold, they determine it goes straight to food bank because it's not going to be reused.
Correct. This is a traditional way of thinking about how to use day-old bread.
Yes.
Is to retail it.
Right.
So in other words, the simple thing that team members...
You need day-old bread for croutons.
Yes, you do. You need, and some people prefer this kind of cut bread that's toasted for soups and whatever they have it, or for instead of Melba toast, something that you buy. So this is a replacement for it.
So Christine,
again, the point to team members here is: do you bake inventory on purpose to create these items, or do you use the excess? Okay, because again, the business proposition here is if you baked this for inventory and you still have excess, and you could have used the excess for this, that's kind of an oops, right? Because you created an inventory of stuff that you didn't need to create, whereas you could have used the excess to create these SKUs. So this would be both shrink management and value added and margin added.
Yeah.
If you used excess instead of baked for.
Right. Well, certainly on a path to zero waste, I can see how this store is definitely getting towards it through this right sizing program.
Yeah, it's really pertinent to understand that we're not trying to say that really, for instance, we're saying 90% diversion. Within the chain, 93% diversion has been the highest. So what we're saying there is that 7% of the stuff we still haven't figured out really how to do it. And we got to get better at that as a chain, there's no doubt about it. At the same time, what right sizing does in the zero waste process, it makes us more attentive to excess that can add value. And that within certain departments, especially prepared foods and produce and meat, the sausage maker, for instance, all of a sudden you have something that was a scrap 10 years ago, it's less shrink and value added to margin. So.
And as this example of one of the highest volume stores, it's a good example for other stores to see if they can do it. This location, Venice, anybody can do it.
Venice can do it with the amount of volume they do and the small back room they do. Yes, I think that is true. That is a good way to say it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing this with us.
My pleasure.
When thinking about zero waste strategies, obviously you can't ignore food waste. I think Tom Wright showed us here today at this Venice Whole Foods Market that it is absolutely obtainable through right sizing.